Hi everyone, it's Jeff Hopper back with Jeff Cranford. We've been talking about threads of righteousness, and in our more recent conversation, we've started to look at some of the specific things that we might do well in our righteousness as we act out what God would have us do. And we talked about the singularity of God and how we present God as the one true God. And there is a bit of a danger in that, because we could, get on our high horse and say it's our God and it's no other God. And while that's true,
everybody hates that. Nobody likes that.
Nobody likes that. And while it's true when it's presented that way, it's just a complete negative, because I would suggest it is not held in balance with some of the other aspects of righteousness. And we talked at the very end, I brought up humility. One of the other threads of righteousness that we find in the Old Testament all the way into the New Testament is this idea of humility. Define humility for me, if you would.
For me, Jeff, humility is always just a right perspective on reality. I mean, sometimes humility is deference to others. It's inclusive in that. Humility is taking like Jesus talked about at the banquet, make sure you don't try to sit at the head of the table, sit down in a lower place and then be invited up. It'd be embarrassing if somebody says, no, you're not supposed to sit there and you have to move down.
Yep.
So those are all elements of humility, but the foundation for all of that is a right view of the created order. Now, the foundations to all humility, in my view, are God is creator and I am the created. I think sometimes we always view the panorama of the narrative and everything about that the Bible talks about, and we view us as being the centerpiece of this. Well, we're not at the center of the story. God is at the center of the story, and we are created beings participating, now created in an unbelievable way, magnificent way. Read Psalm 139.
Right.
Wonderful ways that we've been created, but we still are created. So understanding that we're created and He's the creator all of a sudden puts you with a foundation laid now to really, I think, move into what would be considered humility, and not just social manners or things like that, although that's inclusive, but a real deference to God. I think some people have the idea that humility is always being, so meek, and you never express your opinion and you always take the back of the line, and that to me is not humility at all. Humility would be a right understanding. So if I feel like if God's creator and I'm the created and I want to live in His will and live out my calling in a fallen world, well, there are going to be places where I need to make stands. There's going to be places that I need to express in maybe a vociferous way my opinion on certain things. Some people say, well, that's a lack of humility. I don't think that's a lack of humility, because the foundation is there. It's God's creator and I'm created. So there are a lot of different, it's like a prism, it's a lot of different facets to humility, but again, the foundations, I believe, are creator and created.
Right. And that creation part that you're talking about is an Old Testament concept, but the idea of humility goes all the way through. And so we see Paul writing in Romans 12, sober judgment. Have sober judgment. Do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought. And that's an interesting thing there even. It doesn't say don't think of yourselves highly.
That's right.
Because in actuality, if I'm created by God, that's a thrilling thing.
I have a high view.
That the fingerprint of God is on me. I don't have a negative view of this life is worth nothing and it's just going to go turn to ashes in the end. But it says don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. And so exactly what you're saying, God and then us.
God and then us. And then think about it, Jeff, all the way back to about the time Isaiah was writing, there was another prophet, a minor prophet considered, named Micah. And Micah is a well-known verse, but in Micah chapter 6, verse 8, he says, this is what I really want. God's saying, this is what I really seek. And he says this, this is what's good and what the Lord requires of you, to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. And again, there we have the created creator scenario. So if I'm walking humbly with God, I'm desiring what God wants above what I want. And God reveals Himself in the law in so many different ways about what He considers to be important among human relationships and everything else. So my humility, again, comes out, really is birthed out of my right understanding of who God is and who I am and what God considers to be important. So when He says, love your neighbor as yourself, humility would suggest He's right, I'm created, so Lord, empower me to love my neighbor as myself, and I set that as my intention.
fact, I want to talk to you about that. Let's do a second session on humility and talk a little bit about how this really then unfolds when we're with other people.
Good idea.